The German Shepherd pup dangled from the red maple like a forgotten ornament in the teeth of a Bangor blizzard. A wire bit cruelly into the soft fur of his neck. A rain-soaked scrap of paper clung to his coat, stuck there by freezing drizzle. No worth. Someone had written it with the kind of coldness that didn't tremble. He wasn't meant to survive the night. Down the lonely county road, just as the tail lights of the retreating pickup faded into the whiteout, a battered old truck slowed. Inside, a Marine, scarred more by memory than age, felt something inside him stir. An old vow, one he had never spoken out loud, rose from where he'd buried it. He opened his door and stepped into the storm. Matthew Kane had been driving with the tension of a man who rarely relaxed behind a wheel. His grip was locked, shoulders squared, as if the snowstorm around him were another battlefield and his rust-flecked Tacoma a military vehicle plowing through hostile territory. At 38, he carried his years the way soldiers carry old gear, worn, heavy, and never far enough away. Tall in a way that made him duck through most doorways, his frame was a mix of strength once honed by armor plates and lean lines reclaimed after discharge. A pale seam of scar tissue ran from beneath his left ear into the stubble along his jaw, a ridge winter never failed to find. His hair, clipped short out of habit, showed streaks of gray that hadn't been there before Afghanistan. His eyes, hazel with shards of green, held the steady watchfulness of someone who had learned the hard way never to look away from anything. Around town, he was the man who nodded politely at clerks and disappeared before conversation had the chance to begin. He paid rent early, fixed his own repairs, and walked long paths along the Kenduskeag stream to quiet the noise the war had left in him. Nights like this, snow thick, visibility thin, the world reduced to tunnel vision, dragged him back to sandstorms and radio static. He was nearing the part of the county road where it narrowed and slipped into the edge of the forest when he saw it, soft red light pulsing faintly between the trunks, as though a heartbeat glowed behind the trees. A truck was idling nose first toward the ditch, its taillights smeared by snow, a crooked bumper sticker flapping in the wind. Matthew eased off the accelerator. The old pickup lurched, straightened, then crawled back onto the road with a muffler coughing smoke into the storm. For a second, the interior lit up, just the flare of a cigarette lighter, and Matthew caught a glimpse of the driver. A man with hollow cheeks, a knit cap pulled low, and the kind of tight jaw that came from bad luck or bad choices. His eyes flicked away instantly, refusing contact. The pickup slunk off, the way something guilty slinks into the dark. Matthew pulled his Tacoma onto the shoulder, tires crunching through the drift. Snow dusted the lot, piling in uneven dunes. A red maple stood at the tree line, one of the few still clinging to its name in a land of pines, its ice-weighted branches sagging like tired arms. Something small swayed from the lowest limb. Something wrong. Matthew's chest tightened with that old, familiar pressure, the same feeling that had struck him the first time an IED taught him that silence could kill. He cut the engine. The cold slapped him the moment he stepped out, pushing through his coat, through his bones, through every memory he had tried to bury. Snow screeched softly under his boots as he crossed the lot. His breath rose in tight, controlled clouds. He moved with the deliberate caution of a man clearing a room, eyes sweeping low for anything out of place, hand closing around the flashlight tucked in his jacket. The beam found the trunk first, rough bark scratched and raw where something had rubbed violently. Then it slid up and captured the small shape dangling beneath. Wet fur. Trembling limbs. A fragile body suspended just inches above the ground, legs kicking hopelessly. A German Shepherd puppy. No more than 12 weeks old, though starvation had chiseled his features into something older and heartbreakingly thin. One ear tried to stand while the other drooped, giving him a lopsided, confused look. Snow clung to his black muzzle. His coat, bronze beneath the grime, was matted and cold. The cord around his neck had cut deep, so tight it was both restraint and wound. Matthew steadied the little body with one hand and felt the frantic thrum of a terrified heart. He slipped out the small blade he carried, something meant for opening packages, not saving lives, and sliced the wire free. The pup dropped only an inch, but the relief in that inch was immeasurable. His legs buckled. His ribs heaved. But he did not whine. He simply looked up, eyes too large for his skull, with a gaze that felt like a question and a plea in one. The wet paper note drifted against Matthew's glove. No worth. Take. Rage flickered hot, but he folded it away. There were more urgent things than fury. He knelt beside the pup to assess the damage. The ring around the neck was raw flesh. Behind the left ear, a semicircle of scab, the place a microchip once lived. Someone had dug it out. Brutally. Along the pup's flank, faint bruises bloomed green and blue, as if he had been used for practice injections by someone too cowardly to test on anything larger. The hips jutted sharp. The paws were oversized, the promise of a future someone had tried to erase. His breath was too quick. Too shallow. Matthew shrugged off his field jacket, the one frayed by years and stained by memory, and wrapped the pup, drawing him against his chest. The moment pressure surrounded him, the tiny body relaxed enough to release a soft, broken sound. Not a cry. A decision to keep going. "It's okay," Matthew murmured, voice rough with disuse, scraping like sandpaper. The snow thickened, closing the world around them. He scanned the lot again, tire tracks already half erased by wind, a handful of cheap kibble scattered like bait, boot prints softening in the drift. The truck that had left was long gone. The forest kept its secrets. The pup's mismatched brown eyes found Matthew's again, one flecked with amber, the other soft and dark. Shepherd eyes always looked through you, he remembered. But this was deeper. This was the look of something drowning reaching for a hand. He looked up through the branches. The dark shapes between them pulled him straight back to the desert, to that alley of sun-scorched cinder block, the radio crackling warnings too late, the two boys stepping out with a phone in hand, the explosion that tore the world apart. He remembered the moment Valor, his military K-9 partner, made the choice that saved him. He remembered the weight of a dog who gave everything. Now, under this freezing maple, Matthew felt something echo. Not mystical. Just true. Some lines run long. He lifted the trembling pup higher against his chest. This life was now his responsibility. And he would not fail him. Matthew carried the little bundle of life back toward his truck, his boots following his own prints through the snow. It was a habit drilled into him long ago, leave the way you came in. No surprises that way. He opened the door carefully, slid inside with the puppy pressed to his chest, and reached across to crank the heater. The cabin filled slowly with the hum of warm air, thawing the sting in his fingers. The pup was barely heavier than a loaf of bread. Fragile, ribs sharp beneath the fur that had lost its shine. His paws were too big, his head too small, a contradiction of growth and malnourishment. One ear still refused to stand straight, folding forward in a sad little droop. Dirt and damp lined his coat, clinging to the bronze and black like shadows. But when he shifted, just slightly, and opened his eyes, the dashboard light caught a spark that wasn't supposed to exist in something so close to death. A stubborn glow. A refusal. Matthew tucked the jacket tighter. He kept one hand on the wheel and the other resting gently on the little body, feeling each shallow breath, counting them as if his own life depended on it. Maybe it did. The storm smothered the roads. Snow blew across the empty town like white smoke, hiding everything beneath a cold veil. Matthew drove slowly past shuttered stores, past a gas station where the neon flickered over cracked pavement, past houses still strung with Christmas lights that glowed dimly through frost-covered windows. A freight train wailed somewhere out in the darkness. Bangor was sleeping through the storm, unaware that a life was fighting to stay tethered in the cab of an old Tacoma. As the heater finally warmed the air, Matthew's thoughts drifted where he never allowed them to go. Back to the desert. Back to valor. Valor had been the opposite of fragility. Power wrapped in fur. A 4-year-old sable German shepherd built like purpose itself. The dog could run like a storm, track with a surgeon's precision, and stare down fear the way some men stare down photographs of home. He had belonged to the unit, but he had chosen Matthew, just as dogs often do. Without ceremony. Without words. And in the blast that should have ended Matthew Kane's life, Valor had stepped forward. Taken the force. Given everything. Matthew survived because Valor didn't. Tonight, holding this pup who had been left to die on a tree limb, Matthew felt the shape of that pain again, but softened, somehow, by the flicker of a second chance he didn't think he deserved. The pup shuddered and burrowed deeper against Matthew's chest. His breathing stuttered. A sound escaped him, thin, wet, but still alive. "You're not done," Matthew whispered, his voice roughened by years of silence and sand. "Not yet." At the next red light, he looked down again. The raw patch behind the pup's ear caught the glow of the dash. A chip had been carved out, and not carefully. The edges were ragged, the fur still sticky around it. Whoever had done this hadn't cared about the pain. Only about erasing something. Matthew's hand clenched on the wheel until the leather groaned. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't a stray. This was cruelty with intention. He needed help. He thought of his apartment, small, drafty, space barely big enough for one person, let alone the kind of medical care this pup needed. He thought of the storm getting worse. He thought of the way the pup's breaths paused too long between exhales. Then he thought of Eleanor Brooks. The name alone made his jaw clench and soften at the same time. They had grown up together. A lifetime ago. She was the girl who had been able to calm horses with a whisper, who wore scuffed barn boots to school dances, whose eyes carried a storm of their own under an easy smile. She had lost her younger brother in a car crash on Route 15. She had crawled into the wreckage and held his hand until the ambulance arrived, but not in time. The town said that was the moment she chose her path, never letting another creature die alone. She had become a veterinarian with more heart than resources and ran her small clinic on the edge of town with grit and kindness. Matthew hadn't spoken to her in years. Avoided her, if he was honest. Not because he didn't care, but because caring had cost him too much once already. But tonight there was no hesitation. The pup coughed, a small, wet rattle, and panic shot through him like lightning. Matthew pulled to the side of the road, heart hammering. He cradled the pup, checking for breath. Still there. Fragile. But there. "You're a fighter," he muttered, unable to stop the ghost of a grim smile. Just like him. Valor's memory rose up again, dust, heat, the smell of metal and smoke. The moment he woke under rubble with broken bones and realized he was breathing only because Valor wasn't. Maybe tonight was an echo. A circle closing. Maybe saving this fragile life was the first step toward forgiving himself. Snow poured in waves across the windshield, and he pressed the accelerator. He crossed the bridge over the Kenduskeag stream, tires sliding before catching on salted asphalt. The clinic sign appeared like a lighthouse through the storm. Penobscot Veterinary Care. The lights were mostly off, but a single lamp glowed in the entryway. He parked crookedly, not caring. With the pup tucked tight beneath his jacket, he stormed through the wind and pounded on the door. Footsteps. A shuffle. A groggy voice. Then the door cracked open. Eleanor stood there, wrapped in a huge gray cardigan over her scrubs. Her hair was messy, her expression tired and slightly irritated at being woken in the dead of night. Then she saw Matthew. Her breath caught. Her eyes widened. "Matthew Kane." Her voice was hoarse. "I thought you'd left town for good." He nodded once, unable to form more. He loosened his jacket just enough for her to see what he carried. Her face changed instantly. Weariness vanished. The irritation died. Compassion rose like instinct. "Get inside," she said urgently, swinging the door open. The clinic smelled of cedar shavings and antiseptic. A lone tabby cat blinked sleepily from a kennel. Eleanor led him into the treatment room with quick, practiced steps. Put him here. Matthew hesitated. It felt like letting go of something irreplaceable. But he laid the pup gently on the steel table. Eleanor's breath hitched as she took in the wounds, the ribs, the bruising, the incisions. This isn't from the streets, she murmured. These cuts, these injections, this was done deliberately. Matthew clenched his fists. His knuckles cracked. His breath came harsher. Her voice sharpened. Who did this? Found him hanging from a tree off the county road, he said flatly. There was a note. Said he had no worth. Her jaw tightened. Her eyes grew dark. You've been back in town how long, Matthew? And this is what finally brings you to my doorstep. The words hit him harder than he expected. He said nothing. His hand pressed against the cold metal table until his skin split. Blood welled from his knuckle and slid across the steel. Eleanor's expression softened. Her anger melted into something gentler. Maybe, she whispered, you were just waiting for something to pull you back out of wherever you've been hiding. She touched his arm lightly, then turned back to work. She hooked up fluids, checked vitals, murmured soft reassurances. The pup opened his eyes once, just long enough to find Matthew across the table. Matthew reached out, resting his hand near the small paw. Tiny claws curled against his skin. Something warm flickered inside him, something he hadn't felt since Valor. You've been in the shadows a long time, Eleanor said without looking up. But he's pulling you into the light whether you want it or not. Matthew didn't answer. But his grip on the table stopped shaking. The storm battered the windows. Inside, the battle for one life had begun. The treatment room clock ticked with an almost mocking calm, too steady, too measured, compared to the storm inside the small clinic. Eleanor moved like someone who had patched up 1,000 emergencies, but the calm in her hands was thinning, fraying at the edges. Sweat gathered at her brow despite the cold air, her gloves streaked with blood and antiseptic. The German Shepherd pup lay under the surgical lamp, wrapped in warming blankets, his tiny chest struggling to lift and fall. His breaths were erratic, each inhale a battle on its own. Matthew stood unmoving near the corner, his tall frame bowed forward slightly. His hands, still raw and bleeding from where his nails had dug into his palms, hung at his sides like weights he couldn't release. He had faced firefights, explosions, chaos that broke men in half. Yet nothing, had prepared him for the helplessness of this moment. Eleanor's voice snapped through the tension. Pressures slipping again. The monitor's beeping faltered, dipping into a staggered pattern that made Matthew's heart seize. Caroline Mercer burst into the treatment room after being summoned from her tiny apartment above the bakery. She was in her mid-20s, freckled, short, and sturdy, with the kind of practical competence that came from growing up around farm animals. Her scrubs were mismatched, her boots half unlaced, but her focus was sharp. She slid beside Eleanor, handing over instruments with trembling precision. "What do you need?" she asked, voice thin but steady. "Everything we have," Eleanor muttered. "He's crashing." The pup's little body jerked once, then stilled. The monitor flatlined. A soundless, suffocating moment stretched. Caroline froze, syringe in hand, eyes widening with dread. Her lips parted as if to pray or plead. Eleanor didn't stop. She set her jaw and began compressions, pressing 2 fingers against the frail chest with controlled rhythm. "Don't you quit on me," she whispered fiercely. "Not now." Matthew's entire body went rigid. A memory slammed into him, the sound of the blast, the collapsing sky, Valor's body thrown forward. The terrible silence afterward. The silence he'd lived with ever since. He stepped closer to the table, unable to breathe. His fingers twitched involuntarily. Then, instinctively, he reached out and tapped the edge of the metal tray beside him. Tap tap, top, tap tap. A pattern punched out of muscle memory. A rhythm Valor had known. A rhythm he had trained into the dog with thousands of repetitions. Too short, one long, too short. Hold the line. Eleanor glanced up sharply. Matthew, what are you? But he didn't answer. His hand kept tapping, steady, deliberate, the coded message echoing softly across the steel. His palm trembled, but the rhythm did not falter. Caroline looked between him and the motionless pup, confused and frightened. The room felt suspended in a strange, fragile balance. And then the pup twitched. Just once. But unmistakably. Caroline gasped. The monitor chirped, a single, faint blip. Eleanor's head snapped down. She pressed her stethoscope against the tiny chest, her eyes going wide. There it is, she whispered. A heartbeat. Faint but real. Keep going. Matthew leaned in, voice barely above a whisper. That's it. Come on, buddy. Fight. The pup shuddered. Another thin gulp of air dragged into his lungs. The monitor beeped again, still weak, but steadier. Eleanor moved quickly, guiding Caroline through the next steps as they stabilized his breathing. Caroline's hands shook with disbelief. This shouldn't even be possible. Eleanor peeled off her gloves with a trembling exhale. Her eyes never left the tiny survivor. It's instinct, she murmured, but her voice carried awe. It's memory. Something deep. Something bred into him. She looked up at Matthew. He responded to you. To that signal. Dogs from Valor's line were trained to respond to taps like that, weren't they? Matthew swallowed hard, throat tight. He placed his hand gently near the pup's paw. Tiny claws curled against his skin again, weak but purposeful. The room softened around the edges. For a long time, no one spoke. The only sound was the soft beep of the monitor slowly finding a steady rhythm. The snowstorm hammered the windows outside, but inside the pool of light, something fragile, something miraculous, held on. At last, Eleanor stepped back. He's not out of the woods, she said quietly. But he has a fighting chance. More than I expected. Matthew nodded once, unable to speak for a long, stretched heartbeat. His gaze remained fixed on the small body partially covered by his jacket. A name surfaced inside him, unbidden, rising from memory and meaning. Aiden, he said under his breath. Caroline blinked. Aiden? Matthew's voice cracked slightly. It means, little fire. His eyes softened. And that's exactly what he is. A spark that refuses to die. Eleanor's tired face lifted into a faint smile. Then Aiden it is. The storm outside raged on, but the room felt brighter than it had an hour ago. The pup, Aiden, rested, breathing slow but steady. His fur was still damp. His neck still bore the cruel wire mark. But there was something alive in him now. Something stubborn. Hours passed. The treatment room grew dim as Eleanor lowered the lamp. She worked quietly, checking Aiden's fluids, cleaning the wounds, noting the response of his vitals. Caroline scrubbed instruments with methodical care, though exhaustion tugged at her eyes. Matthew hadn't moved an inch. He stood rooted beside the table, watching each rise and fall of Aiden's tiny chest. His posture, rigid at first, began to ease just slightly. His shoulders loosened. The crease between his brows softened. Eleanor approached him gently. I need to check something, she said. Carefully, she examined the shaved area behind Aiden's ear where the microchip once had been. With delicate forceps, she probed deeper into the damaged tissue. Matthew flinched involuntarily but didn't stop her. A small glint of metal caught the light. Eleanor eased out a shattered fragment of chip, silicon and metal no bigger than a clipped nail. She held it under the lamp, turning it between her fingers. Caroline leaned in. Is that part of his ID? Eleanor didn't answer immediately. Her face sharpened with focus. The numbers etched on the metal were faint but legible. Not a standard registry, she murmured. This is military. Matthew's breath halted. Eleanor met his eyes. I've seen these in classified K-9 units. And this one, she pointed to the sequence etched in the shard. This matches the program Valor was bred in. Silence washed cold and heavy through the room. Aiden wasn't just a discarded puppy. He was connected to Valor. To everything Matthew had tried to bury. Caroline stepped back in awe. That's why he reacted to the taps, she whispered. It wasn't random at all. Aiden stirred in his blankets, a soft, exhausted sigh escaping him. Matthew placed a steady hand on the pup's side. All the memories, all the losses, all the guilt tightened and loosened inside him at once. Before he could speak, headlights flashed across the frost-coated front window. A vehicle. Stopping. Eleanor stiffened. Caroline froze. Then. A hard knock rattled the glass door. Eleanor hesitated, peeling off her gloves. Matthew was already moving, instincts rising like old ghosts. Through the frosted pane, the shape of a man loomed, broad-shouldered, hood pulled low, posture too still to be harmless. Eleanor cracked the door. Cold air slammed in. The man's voice followed. You shouldn't have taken him, he said evenly. That dog isn't yours to save. Walk away while you still can. Matthew stepped forward, body blocking Eleanor. His voice was low and carved from gravel. He's not going anywhere. The man tilted his head, something like amusement flickering in his shadowed eyes. This isn't your fight. Marine. He let the word hang like a warning. Then he turned, walked through the snow, and drove off in a black SUV that disappeared into the storm. Inside the clinic, silence filled the space he'd left. Matthew returned to Aiden's side, placing a steady hand near the pup's trembling ribs. His voice came out low, dangerous, unshakable. They'll have to go through me first. The night outside had turned to iron. The storm raged as though it had taken a personal interest in burying the world, and Bangor, already a town used to cold, seemed to shrink into itself under the weight of the wind. The clinic windows rattled now and then, a reminder that the world beyond the glass wasn't letting up. Inside, warmth hummed quietly, a stark contrast to the danger that had just come to their door. Eleanor locked the clinic entrance again, hands trembling for only a heartbeat before she forced them steady. Caroline stood near the counter, wide-eyed, gripping its edge like it might anchor her. Matthew didn't move from the recovery table. Aiden lay bundled in blankets, breathing slow and fragile. The Marine's hand rested near the pup's side, fingers barely grazing the fur, but the contact seemed to keep him grounded. They'll be back, Eleanor whispered. Her voice was thin, but not fearful, just taut with concern. Whoever that man was, he didn't come alone. Matthew didn't look up. I know. What are we dealing with? Caroline asked, hugging her arms around herself. Matthew stared at the wall a long time before answering. Someone tied to the program Valor came from. Someone who wanted Aiden erased. And someone who knows what I am. A hush fell over the room. Eleanor exhaled slowly and reached for her laptop on the nearby counter. If someone is willing to carve a chip out of a puppy and leave him to die in a tree, it's part of something bigger. I want to know what. She opened the laptop, placed the broken chip fragment beside it, and pulled up a series of old software tools she kept for decoding various animal registry formats. Most veterinarians never touched these programs. Eleanor had learned them out of necessity in Bangor, where abandoned animals often came with mismatched or tampered IDs. The screen glowed in the dim room. Lines of code appeared. Static. A faint thread of data. A ping. There's something left in here, she murmured. A partial signal. Coordinates, Maybe part of an old access point. Matthew straightened. Show me. Eleanor enlarged the trace. It was faint, like the residue of something that shouldn't still exist, but there were numbers. Coordinates. A timestamp. An inactive frequency once used by military contractors. It's not enough to pinpoint anything, Eleanor said, but it's enough to say there's a location tied to him. Matthew studied the screen, jaw tightening. If they removed the chip, they wanted him untraceable. Whatever he came from, they don't want anyone finding it. Caroline hovered behind them, uneasy. Are we safe here? Matthew didn't sugarcoat. Not for long. He shifted his coat, checked the window again, and then looked down at Aiden. The pup blinked once, exhausted but aware, his mismatched brown eyes tracking Matthew with a trust far too deep for something so young. Then we need to move, Matthew said quietly. We find out where he came from. We get evidence. And we shut it down. Eleanor hesitated. You're talking about going after whoever did this. I'm talking about protecting him. Matthew's voice hardened. And every dog they might still be hurting. Caroline swallowed. But, at night? In a storm? Matthew shook his head. We don't have time. They know the pup's alive. They'll want him back. That man didn't look like he was asking, Eleanor added. Matthew grabbed his jacket and carefully lifted Aiden from the table. The pup whimpered softly, but Matthew's warmth calmed him. The blankets cocooned his frail body, only his nose peeked out. Eleanor slid the laptop into a waterproof case. I'm coming with you. Matthew looked up sharply. Ellie, no. You will need medical support if he crashes again. She zipped the case. If you find other dogs, you'll need someone who knows what she's doing. And, she paused, softening, I'm not letting you face this alone. Matthew's jaw flexed with conflict, but he didn't argue. Caroline crossed her arms. I'm going too. No, Eleanor said instantly. Caroline lifted her chin. With respect, Dr. Brooks, you need someone to back you up. And I grew up around working dogs. I know how to move quietly. I know how to handle fear. Matthew studied her for a moment. Her hands trembled slightly, but her stance was firm. Determined. He nodded once. Stay close. No heroics. She nodded back, eyes steady. Within minutes, they bundled Aiden into the truck, setting up a small heated pad Eleanor kept for emergencies. The pup's breathing eased slightly, his little head resting against the jacket that still smelled of Matthew and storm and safety. Matthew started the engine, killed the headlights, and rolled slowly away from the clinic. They drove through the sleeping town with only the faint glow of the dashboard and the ghostly reflection of snow swirling in the dark. Eleanor sat in the passenger seat, laptop open, studying the faint signal again. Caroline sat in the back beside Aiden, keeping a hand on the pup's side. Rain began to mix with the snow, turning everything slick and black. After 10 minutes of following the coordinates' direction, Eleanor leaned forward. There, she whispered. Look past the pines. A shape emerged through the weather, a low compound surrounded by chain-link fence, illuminated by flickering floodlights. The kind of building erected fast, used hard, and forgotten. But not empty. Dozens of dog barks carried through the wind, muffled but unmistakably distressed. Matthew parked at a rise overlooking the compound, engine cut. The storm hid them like a curtain. They ventured out silently into the biting wind, crouching low behind an old rusted oil drum. Below, shapes moved in the yard. German shepherds. Dozens. Some pacing in cramped cages. Some lying too still. Eleanor's hand rose to her mouth, breath trembling. Dear God. Matthew scanned the yard. He recognized military order immediately, everything arranged with the harsh efficiency of someone trained to value precision over compassion. Movement at the warehouse door caught his eye. A tall, broad man stepped out, lighting a cigarette with the calm of someone who believed he owned the night. Caleb Rohr. Matthew's stomach dropped. Rohr had once been a decorated Marine K-9 trainer, someone Matthew had respected. Someone valued. Yet here he was, hardened by whatever had twisted him since leaving the Corps. His posture was stiff, his eyes cold, his movements practiced. Then another figure emerged. Daniel Harlow. A name Matthew had not spoken in years. A man he once trusted with his life. A soldier who could make the worst days bearable with a joke in the dirt. Now his shoulders slumped, his expression hollow. The loyalty that used to shine in him was gone, replaced by something dull and resigned. Matthew's chest tightened painfully. Eleanor whispered, "Do you know him?" "We served together," Matthew murmured. "He saved me once." Harlow unlocked a cage and dragged out a weakened shepherd, refusing to meet the dog's eyes. Just following orders now. Empty orders. No conscience left to guide him. Matthew's fists curled so hard his knuckles popped. Eleanor touched his arm lightly. "We need proof," she reminded him softly. "If we're going to stop them, we need the world to see." Matthew took a long breath. He forced every instinct screaming for violence back down into discipline. But before they could retreat, Harlow looked up. And their eyes met. Recognition struck like lightning between them. Pain. Shame. Maybe a plea for help. Then Harlow looked away. Matthew's heart ached. This was more than a rescue. More than a broken program. This was betrayal by men who once had been brothers. He whispered, "We've seen enough." They backed into the trees, the cries of the dogs trailing after them like ghosts begging for salvation. The mission was no longer simple. This was war. And Matthew knew how to fight one. The storm returned with a vengeance, almost as if the night itself had taken sides. Rain fell in sheets so heavy it blurred the floodlights around the compound into trembling white halos. Snow melted into mud, into black slush that swallowed sound and reflected the chaos above. Matthew, Eleanor, and Caroline stood at the edge of the tree-line, the cold sinking through coats and boots. Aidan was tucked inside Matthew's jacket again, his frail body shivering, not from fear, but from the effort of holding himself together. The pup's amber-flecked eyes scanned the compound with unsettling focus for something so weak. His damp fur clung to his ribs, but his posture held a quiet defiance. He knew this place. Or he recognized it the way trauma remembers on instinct. Matthew crouched low behind a rusted oil drum, scanning the perimeter. The rain plastered his hair to his forehead, tracing the scar along his jaw in cold streaks. His senses sharpened into a soldier's tunnel vision, sound, movement, patterns, all narrowing into clarity. He flicked 2 fingers toward Eleanor, signaling for her to stay close. She crouched behind him, clutching her phone already set to record. Her face was pale, rain dripping from her lashes, but her resolve was iron. "The east side of the fence," Matthew murmured. "Weak spots in the chain link. That's where we go in." Eleanor nodded. Caroline pulled her hood low, anxiety flickering across her expression but not slowing her. Matthew led them, slipping through the darkness. Rain masked their footsteps. The weak point in the fence sagged under rust, and with a few silent cuts from his wire cutters, the metal peeled open enough for them to slip through. The moment they entered the yard, the sound hit them. Dogs. Dozens of German shepherds crying, barking, pacing, or lying unmoving in cramped, rusted cages. Their breath steamed in the cold. Some watched the intruders with hope. Some with confusion. Some with eyes too dull to understand anything anymore. Eleanor's throat tightened. God, how long have they been living like this? Matthew didn't answer. He didn't need to. The cruelty was written everywhere, on the rusted bars, on the worn dirt floors, on the way some of the dogs lifted their heads with impossible effort. Aiden let out a low, guttural sound Matthew had never heard from him before, some mix of warning and grief. His body trembled, not from weakness, but from recognizing the suffering engraved into the place. "Easy, buddy," Matthew whispered, one hand on the pup through his jacket. They crept toward the warehouse door. Through the crack, Matthew could see silhouettes moving in the harsh yellow interior, crates stacked like coffins, tables holding syringes and tools, paperwork scattered across clipboards. And at the center, Caleb Rohr barked orders with the precision of a man who used to wear a uniform with pride. His voice cut sharp through the storm's roar. Daniel Harlow lingered behind him. Shoulders heavy. Eyes down. The man Matthew once trusted with his life now looked hollowed out. Rohr turned. Harlow handed him a clipboard with a trembling hand. Matthew's jaw clenched so hard he tasted metal. Something in Aiden reacted then. His head lifted. His body stiffened. He pressed forward as if pulled by invisible thread. Matthew felt it. Recognition. Memory woven into bone. He tightened his hold, but Aiden wriggled, pushing against the blanket, staring toward the warehouse. "I know," Matthew whispered. "We end it tonight." He slipped through the open door. The hinges creaked. Rohr spun instantly. Rain dripped from Matthew's clothes as he stepped into the exposed light, tall, shadowed, a figure cut from storm and war. A slow, cold smile crawled across Rohr's face. "Well," he drawled, cigarette sizzling as rainwater hit its embers, "if it isn't the Marine." Matthew didn't respond. His eyes darted, taking in the surroundings, the layout, the cages, the exits. Eleanor and Caroline slipped behind crates, phone recording. Rohr stepped closer. "You should have stayed out of this. That pup is property." Matthew's voice came out low and unshaking. "He's a life. He's a failed asset. He's a dog," Matthew growled. Rohr's face hardened. "A tool, Kane. A tool meant to either perform or be destroyed. That's how the world works." "No," Matthew said, stepping forward, rainwater dripping off him like armor. "That's how cowards operate." Rohr's eyes sharpened. "You think you're saving something? You're not. You're interfering with an operation that pays more than your entire service ever did." Matthew's fists tightened. "You trained these dogs to protect people. And now you're selling them?" Rohr shrugged. "Loyalty doesn't pay bills." Before Matthew could speak again, Aiden burst from the jacket, unexpected, sudden, fierce. The tiny pup struck the cage door nearest him, pawing, clawing, barking hoarsely. The chain rattled. Other dogs responded, barks rising, hope swelling, a chorus of desperation that filled the warehouse. "Stop him!" Rohr snapped, fury twisting his face. Harlow stepped forward reluctantly, gripping a lead rope with shaking hands. He moved toward Aiden, but something in the pup's trembling defiance stopped him. Harlow froze. For a heartbeat, their eyes met, Harlow and Aiden. Recognition flickered. Harlow saw valor in those small, desperate eyes. His breath caught. Rohr shoved him aside and lunged at Matthew. The fight erupted violently. Rohr swung with the force of a man who had never let himself go soft. Matthew countered with the reflexes of someone who'd been in too many life-or-death fights to count. Their punches echoed off metal cages. Dogs barked wildly. Rain hammered the roof like gunfire. Rohr slammed Matthew into a crate. Metal rattled. Pain shot through Matthew's ribs. But Matthew surged forward, grappling him, muscles straining. Rohr's blows were sharp, controlled, trained. Matthew's were driven by something deeper. A purpose. A promise. A life behind him that deserved more than death in a tree. Aiden, hearing Matthew grunt in pain, launched himself at Rohr. His small teeth clamped onto Roar's arm. Roar roared and swung wildly, but the pup held on, refusing to let go. "Get off!" Roar bellowed. That was Matthew's opening. He tackled Roar to the ground and delivered a punch that finally stilled him. Roar collapsed, unconscious. Aiden released his grip, panting, blood staining his muzzle. The warehouse went silent except for the storm tearing at the roof. Eleanor rushed forward, breathless, holding her phone high. "It's all recorded," she said, voice shaking. "Every second." Caroline appeared beside her, shock and triumph warring in her expression. "The world is going to see everything they've done." Around them, the freed shepherds pressed against their cages, tails wagging weakly despite exhaustion, despite fear, despite everything. Hope rose like heat from the floor. Eleanor hit send, uploading the video to every reporter she knew, people who wouldn't bury a story like this. Matthew knelt beside Aiden, gently lifting the trembling pup into his arms. "You did good," he whispered. But deep inside, he felt it. This wasn't the end. This was only the first battle. Dawn crawled over Bangor cautiously, like a tired hand pulling back the curtain after a long, violent night. The storm had finally spent itself, leaving the world coated in a thin sheen of frozen thaw that glittered faintly beneath the first pale rays of morning. The streets were quiet except for the slow rumble of plows tracing their early routes and the murmured hum of a town waking to unexpected news. By sunrise, the fight inside Caleb Roar's warehouse had already begun to circulate everywhere. Eleanor's video, shaky but undeniable, had spread from local reporters to statewide outlets, then onward like a spark catching dry timber. Screens in diners, gas stations, and living room corners glowed with the story of the Marine and the nearly dead German Shepherd pup rescued from a criminal operation. Matthew didn't watch any of it. He focused on the only thing that mattered. Aiden had made it through the night. Though still small and weak, the pup now rested on a soft blanket inside the community center, curled near a portable heater Eleanor had set up. His breathing was steadier. His gaze brighter. His coat, after Eleanor's careful cleaning, showed the true bronze beneath the grime. The dark saddle along his back looked sharper now, though his ribs still pressed through too easily. He stood shakily, testing his legs, then followed Matthew's shadow with determined little steps. Matthew walked beside him, offering his palm whenever Aiden needed reassurance, which was often. Or perhaps it was Matthew who needed the contact. The community center had been opened hastily by town officials and volunteers after the rescue. The cavernous hall buzzed with motion, people arriving with blankets, dog food, toys, towels, and open arms. Families stood in clusters around the once-caged shepherds, many of whom wagged their tails tentatively, tasting freedom for the first time in months. The building smelled of fresh coffee, wet fur, and something warmer, hope that hadn't existed hours earlier. Matthew stood near the entrance, taking it all in. His presence, tall, scarred, quietly watchful, drew attention, though he didn't seek it. Volunteers nodded at him with gratitude. Strangers whispered his name. A reporter tried to approach, but Eleanor intercepted with a practiced glare that sent them scurrying. Matthew didn't mind. He wasn't here for interviews. Aiden pressed against his boot, paws clumsy as he peered up at him. Matthew reached down, letting the pup nose into his palm. "You're safe now," he murmured. A tiny, content rumble answered him. An elderly couple approached then, Mr. and Mrs. Hanlon, longtime town residents with gentle eyes and stooped frames. Mrs. Hanlon took Matthew's hands between her own, her voice trembling with emotion. "We're taking one of the older boys home," she said, nodding toward a gray-muzzled shepherd resting nearby. "He doesn't have many years left. We want those years to be warm." Matthew swallowed, nodding. "He'll be lucky to have you." Children ran through the hall next, laughing as rescued dogs licked their faces. A little boy with a mop of blonde curls knelt in front of Aiden, offering his hand timidly. Aiden took a step forward, sniffed, then leaned his forehead gently against the child's chest. Matthew felt something in him loosen, something that had been locked tight for years. Across the room, Eleanor stood surrounded by town officials. Her auburn hair was braided neatly now, those strands escaped to frame her face. She wore a clean olive sweater under her lab coat, posture tall despite exhaustion. She gestured animatedly while speaking, about animal welfare, about military K-9 units, about community responsibility. Her words carried conviction strong enough to galvanize the reluctant and strengthen the willing. When she caught Matthew's eye, her expression softened into something warm. Later, Eleanor moved to stand at the front of the room. The crowd quieted. "This isn't only a rescue," she began, her voice ringing clear despite fatigue. "It's a reckoning. For years, working dogs and service dogs have been discarded the moment they stop being useful. Some never find homes. Some die waiting." A murmur rippled through the volunteers, anger, disbelief, sorrow. "That ends today," she continued, scanning every face. "We're starting a program, Second Chance K9. A place where retired service dogs, abandoned working dogs, and injured shepherds will be rehabilitated, rehomed, and honored for what they've given." Applause rose gently, then grew. Eleanor lifted her chin slightly. "And I can't do this alone." Heads turned toward Matthew before she even said his name. "We need handlers. Trainers. People who understand these dogs. People who know what they've carried. People like Matthew Kane." The applause quieted into a kind of reverent hush, all eyes shifting to him. Matthew stiffened at the sudden spotlight. The Marine in him braced instinctively, but Aiden nudged his ankle, urging him forward. Puppies don't understand stage fright, they understand only the need to stay close to the person who saved them. So Matthew stepped toward Eleanor. He cleared his throat, voice gravelly with discomfort but steady. "I'm not a speech person," he said plainly. A few people chuckled. "But I know what these dogs give. I know what they sacrifice. And I know how it feels when the world forgets them." He glanced down at Aiden, who looked back with unwavering trust. "Eleanor's program is the right thing. So if she's building it, I'll stand with her. I'll train. I'll help. I'll fight for them. Because they deserve better." The applause this time wasn't loud but warm, like the slow flare of a hearth fire. And for the first time in years, Matthew didn't feel out of place in the world around him. He felt anchored. After the gathering, children spilled into the snow-covered yard outside the community center. Aiden, stronger with every hour, followed them. He ran awkwardly at first, gangly, unbalanced, but then with more confidence, chasing a red rubber ball tossed by a girl with pink mittens. "Aiden," she giggled as he bounded toward her, tail wagging furiously. The morning sun caught his coat, turning the bronze to gold. Matthew stood nearby, hands in his jacket pockets, watching the pup tumble into the snow and pop up again, unbothered. Something eased inside him, a knot he hadn't realized he'd been carrying since the desert. Eleanor stepped next to him, arms folded against the cold. She watched Aiden with a soft smile. "You see it, don't you?" she asked quietly. "See what?" "That he didn't just survive because of you." She glanced at Matthew. "You're surviving because of him." Matthew let the word settle. Slowly, he nodded, eyes on the pup rolling joyfully in the snow. "Yeah," he said. "He saved me, too." The sun rose fully then, warm, soft, golden, casting long rays across Bangor, the children, the freed shepherds, and the once broken pup now running on new legs. For the first time in a long time, Matthew felt the war inside him quiet. Aiden had been left for dead. But now he carried hope like a torch. This wasn't an ending. It was their beginning. The days that followed unfolded with a rhythm Bangor had never seen before. Where there had once been silence and snow-covered sidewalks, there was now movement, steady, hopeful, purposeful. The community center transformed into a temporary command post for Second Chance K9, its halls filled with the sounds of dogs adjusting to freedom, volunteers learning new routines, and children sneaking in extra minutes of play. Matthew arrived every morning before sunrise. Not because anyone asked him to. Not because he felt obligated. But because for the first time in years, he had somewhere he belonged. And someone who needed him. Aiden greeted him each morning with that same determined spark in his mismatched eyes. The pup had gained weight, his once frail frame now rounding gently with health. His gait, still slightly uneven, grew stronger by the day. When Matthew opened the door each dawn, Aiden launched into a clumsy run, tail flailing like an excited banner behind him. "You're going to break your own legs doing that," Matthew murmured every morning, scooping him up before he could crash into a chair. Aiden responded by licking his chin and burrowing into his jacket. Eleanor often emerged from her office moments later, binder under one arm, exhaustion under her eyes, and determination under her smile. She worked without rest, coordinating vet schedules, arranging foster placements, organizing food donations, and replying to the avalanche of messages pouring in from across the country. She hardly slept. Caroline barely did either. But they didn't complain. The mission was bigger than fatigue. By the end of the week, nearly all the rescued shepherds had been placed into foster homes, some with retired officers, others with families who understood the commitment. A few remained for medical care, but each day their eyes brightened as they adjusted to gentle hands instead of cages. Yet something darker loomed. Caleb Rohr had disappeared. Authorities had arrived at the warehouse too late, someone tipped him off after the fight. Only Harlow had stayed behind, surrendering quietly with hollow resignation. He didn't resist arrest. Didn't ask for mercy. Just sat with his head bowed like a man who'd finally run out of places to hide from himself. Matthew visited him once, but said nothing. The silence between them carved its own truth. Still, Rohr's absence meant the danger wasn't gone. Not by a long shot. One cold morning, just as Matthew finished cleaning the training yard, Eleanor hurried toward him with a furrowed brow. "Matt," she called. "Can we talk?" Aiden trotted beside him, still damp from rolling in the snow. Matthew tucked the pup under one arm and followed Eleanor into her office. She closed the door softly behind them. "Something came in overnight," she said, holding out a printed email. "I think you need to see this." Matthew scanned the message. A private military contractor. An unnamed, K9 program asset. A request for information. A warning disguised as protocol. His jaw clenched. "They're looking for him." Eleanor nodded. "They're not giving details, but the wording, it doesn't feel like a rescue mission. It feels like someone trying to retrieve stolen equipment." Matthew's hand tightened around the paper. "Aiden is not equipment." "I know," Eleanor said softly. "But they won't care." He paced the room once, then stopped at the window overlooking the training yard. Outside, Caroline tossed a ball to one of the older dogs, her laughter carrying faintly on the wind. Eleanor moved beside him. "What do we do?" Matthew took a long breath. "We prepare." "Prepare for what?" "For them to come." He didn't raise his voice, didn't tense, didn't show fear. It was the tone of someone who had lived through too many storms to be rattled by thunder. That afternoon, Matthew began reinforcing the center's security. Not in a paranoid way, just cautious. Smart. Ready. The town noticed. Deputy Collins stopped by with a box of locks. Fire Chief Howard installed new floodlights. Local hunters volunteered to patrol the wooded areas at night. Veterans from the VFW hall arrived unexpectedly with thermoses of coffee and stories Matthew didn't ask for but accepted quietly. It wasn't a militia. It wasn't a mob. It was a community protecting something pure. Aiden watched all of it with wide, curious eyes, ears perked, tail wagging at every new face. As night fell, Matthew took the pup outside for one last walk before settling him in. The snow had returned, not storm level, just a gentle drift glistening under the moonlight. Aiden bounded ahead, then circled back, nose to the ground, tail cutting lazy arcs in the crisp air. Matthew knelt in the snow, letting Aiden curl against his knee. He scratched the pup's ear in quiet thought. "You've stirred up a lot," he whispered. "More than you know." Aiden pressed his forehead to Matthew's boot, humming softly in contentment. When they returned to the center, Caroline rushed toward them with a wide grin. "Matt! Aiden! Come see this." She led them into the main hall, where a projector had been set up. Dozens of children and families sat on blankets and chairs, sipping hot cocoa while watching a slideshow Eleanor had created, photos of the rescued shepherds, their foster families, their progress reports. Aiden's picture, taken only the day after the rescue, appeared last. A small gasp rippled through the children. Caroline nudged Matthew. "He's famous." Matthew scoffed softly. "He's lucky." "Maybe," she said with a wink, "but I think you both are." Eleanor leaned against the back wall, watching Matthew instead of the screen. His posture was still rigid, the soldier in him always at the surface, but there was something new in his face. Something softer. A quiet thaw. Later, when the families had left and the hall grew still, Matthew and Eleanor remained behind, cleaning up cups, folding chairs, stacking blankets. "You don't have to do all this alone," Eleanor said suddenly, her voice low. Matthew looked up. "I'm not." She studied him, her gaze more direct than it had ever been. "You know what I mean." A beat of silence hung between them. Then Aiden, half asleep in Matthew's jacket, let out a tiny sneeze that echoed across the hall. Eleanor laughed, quiet, warm, tired, and Matthew felt something in his chest shift in response. Like a door opening. He cleared his throat. "We should get some sleep." "Yeah," she whispered. "Tomorrow's going to be big." He nodded, lifting Aiden closer to his chest. Aiden yawned, nuzzled his chin, and curled up with absolute trust. Outside, snow fell softly, peaceful but watchful, as if the world itself held its breath. Because tomorrow wasn't just another day. It was the day everything changed. Morning rose with a brightness Bangor hadn't seen in weeks, clear skies, crisp sunlight, and a calm so steady it felt unnatural after the storm-filled days before. The quiet wasn't comforting, it was tense, like the world was inhaling and holding its breath. Matthew felt it the moment he stepped outside. Shadows were too still. Wind too soft. Air too alert. Aiden padded beside him, tail swaying with a slow, thoughtful rhythm. The pup tilted his head as if sensing something in the distance, the way trained K9s retained instinct long before they understood logic. Inside the community center, volunteers bustled with their usual energy. Dogs barked playfully. Caroline's laughter echoed from the far hall as she helped children prepare toys for the remaining foster pups. But Matthew stayed near the entrance, eyes narrowed toward the road. Eleanor approached, a clipboard tucked under one arm. She had barely slept, yet determination sharpened her features as always. "You feel it too, don't you?" she asked quietly. Matthew didn't look away from the distance. "Something's coming." Eleanor exhaled. Roar. Or someone sent by the organization behind him. Aiden sniffed the air again. His ears lifted, stiff, alert. Matthew carefully lifted the pup and tucked him against his chest. "Get everyone inside. Lock the back exits. Keep the kids in the east wing." Eleanor hesitated. "Matt. Go," he said gently, but firmly. She obeyed, calling to the volunteers. The tone of her voice shifted the atmosphere instantly. Laughter dimmed. Movements became cautious. Doors were locked. Curtains drawn. In minutes, the community center was silent except for the muffled breathing of anxious dogs. Matthew stepped outside alone. Snow crunched beneath his boots. Breath misted in the cold. Aiden buried himself deeper into Matthew's jacket, but his eyes remained sharp, focused on the road where dark shapes emerged. A vehicle. Black. Heavy. Government grade. It rolled forward slowly, gravel crackling under the tires as if the earth itself were protesting. Matthew stood still. The vehicle stopped. A door opened. And Caleb Rohr stepped out. Not wounded. Not hiding. Not running. Smiling. "I knew you'd be here, Kane," Rohr said, adjusting his gloves as though arriving for a business meeting. "Always in the middle of the fight you should have walked away from." Matthew didn't move. "You lost your operation." Rohr chuckled darkly. "Operations can be rebuilt. Assets can be replaced." He nodded toward Matthew's jacket, where a small brown nose peeked out. "Aiden, though," Rohr sighed. "He was something special. A genetic marvel. We invested years into his bloodline." Matthew's grip tightened. "He's not going anywhere with you." "You're a soldier, Kane," Rohr said, stepping closer, boots cutting into the snow. "You understand loyalty. You understand orders. So let me give you one." He pointed at the pup. "Hand him over." Matthew didn't blink. "No." Rohr clicked his tongue. "That's disappointing." Footsteps crunched behind him as two more men emerged from the SUV, broad shoulders, cold eyes, uniforms without insignias. They flanked Rohr like well-trained shadows. "You know," Rohr added, "I used to admire you. Thought you were one of the few good ones left." His voice lowered to a venomous rasp. "Then you chose a dog over your own rank." "A dog saved my life," Matthew replied evenly. "And I won't let you turn his kind into weapons." Rohr smirked. "Everything's a weapon if you train it right." He snapped his fingers. The two men stepped forward. Matthew set Aiden gently on the snow. "Stay," he whispered. Aiden froze, not out of fear, but obedience carved into his bones. The first man lunged. Matthew blocked the strike, grabbed his coat, and sent him crashing into the ice. The second swung with calculated precision, but Matthew sidestepped, twisting him into a chokehold before dropping him to the ground. Rohr didn't step back. He applauded. "Still got it, Kane." Matthew wiped blood from his lip. "Walk away." "Oh, I intend to," Rohr said, pulling something from his coat. "With what I came for." He raised a tranquilizer pistol. Matthew didn't hesitate. He charged. The shot fired, hissing through the air. Matthew dodged, tackling Rohr into the snow. The two crashed down in a flurry of limbs, fists, and rage. Rohr fought with feral aggression, but Matthew fought with purpose, every strike driven by Aiden, by valor, by the dogs who had suffered in silence. Rohr slammed an elbow into Matthew's ribs. Pain seared up his side. Matthew countered, grabbing Rohr's wrist and wrenching the tranquilizer gun free. Rohr snarled. "You think you can protect him? You think this will end because you want it to?" Matthew pressed the barrel to Rohr's shoulder. "I don't think," he said calmly. "I act." He pulled the trigger. The dart fired. Rohr jerked. His eyes widened. Then his body slumped into the snow, limbs limp, consciousness fading. Silence settled over the road. Matthew stood, chest heaving, snow melting where his body heat touched the ground. Aiden trotted toward him shakily, tail wagging with pure relief. Matthew scooped him up, pressing his forehead against the pup's. "It's over," he whispered. But a voice answered from behind. "No," Eleanor said. "It's finally beginning." She stood at the edge of the path with Deputy Collins and two state officers, drawn by the commotion. They secured Rohr and his men, calling for backup. Collins saluted Matthew with a solemn nod. "You did the right thing, Eleanor murmured. Matthew turned toward her. Did I? Or did I just start something bigger? Eleanor rested a hand on his shoulder. Sometimes starting something is the only way to end it. Caroline rushed from the center, tears in her eyes as she hugged Aidan tightly. Volunteers cheered from the windows. Children pressed their faces to the glass, watching Matthew like he was the hero they'd only seen in movies. But Matthew didn't feel like a hero. He felt responsible. For every dog rescued. For every dog still out there. For every life the program had taken. Over the coming weeks, Roar's arrest sparked investigations that rippled across state lines. News reports uncovered a network of illegal K-9 trafficking operations. Donations poured in from across the country. Second Chance K-9 became more than a program, it became a movement. The warehouse was shut down. Laws were rewritten. Families adopted shepherds who had only known darkness before. And Matthew? He became something he never expected. A leader. A protector. A home. He trained the shepherds with patience. He taught local officers how to handle working dogs with respect. He rebuilt his life with the quiet consistency of a man who had finally found peace. And Aidan, once a near-lifeless pup hanging by a thread, grew into a strong, loyal dog with unmatched intelligence. His bond with Matthew deepened until they moved as one, understood as one, breathed as one. One evening, months after the rescue, Matthew sat on the hill overlooking Bangor. Aidan lay beside him, head on his lap, fur glistening in the sunset's golden light. "You were never meant to die in those woods," Matthew whispered. "You were meant to lead me out of mine." Aidan nudged his palm with a soft, warm sigh. Below them, the community center glowed, bright windows filled with life, laughter, and second chances. Eleanor stood at the entrance, watching them with a smile that hinted at a future not yet spoken aloud but understood all the same. Matthew glanced at Aidan. "Come on," he said softly. "We've got work to do." They descended the hill together, one man, one dog, walking toward a world they had rebuilt side by side. Not as soldier and weapon. But as survivors. As partners. As family.